So the purpose of the Teen Think Tank project is to empower teenagers by not only giving them a voice, but the tools and resources they need to flourish and make a positive impact in society.
One of the things that stood out to me right from the beginning was the amount of team building we did, as in getting to know our fellow research associates and becoming familiar in order to maximize our working strategies. For example, we started with the Belbin team role assessments and communication style assessments in order to really grasp what our communication styles are like and be able to work efficiently based on our preferences.
So for academic development, one of the very important things now that I'm getting ready to go off to college, I'm a senior in high school, is learning how to do real academic research. I feel in schools, they tell you to write a research paper and put it in MLA format, and you're not really given any feedback on it, besides the grade that you get at the end, and it's okay, let's move on to the next topic. Here at the Teen Think Tank Project, they really drilled that into our heads, how you conduct real research, the tedious process that is editing your research paper. I'm taking dual enrollment classes at a local college, and I was just recently working on a research paper, and my professor said, has anybody written like an actual research paper? And it was kind of cool to be in a class with people who are freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and even seniors in college who didn't raise their hand, but I was the senior in high school who raised their hand because I wrote a real research paper.
And what I'll share with you, from the perspective of being a parent to these kids that are, in high school. And I'll speak to Samir first, who's my current 12th grader. He is, eyeball deep in college applications, and the opportunity this has provided to differentiate himself, to stretch his thinking, his leadership, to come across in a college essay or a college interview as somebody that's working on something from, essentially side by side with Matt and Kelly from the ground up, figuring it out as you go, leading as you go, having access to experts, in these industries, being comfortable communicating. You get more than your traditional experience.
Your administration. So the stuff you guys are learning, I didn't really dive into that until I was a master's student. So I commend you all for that.
And I'm looking forward to each one of you somehow contributing in huge, big ways. Your generation, it's where it's at.
So one of the things that we're looking to do is it's a 12-week program. 12-week program. We're about 3 weeks into it now. But in late March, early April, we're going to publish content. We're going to publish policy work that says, this is what we found. This is what we understand to be relevant. This is what we want to see happen. We'll share that with you. We'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Please do. So you're a real think tank.
We are a real think tank. Hello, and welcome to the Teen Think Tank Project NextGen Research Incubator summer presentation. The NextGen Research Incubator is more than a summer program. It's a launchpad for high school students to engage in real-world public policy research. Over the past several weeks, our research associates have worked independently, yet with mentorship and support, to dive into topics that matter to them. This work reflects a unique combination of academic rigor, creativity, and commitment to drive change in their communities. This independent study track empowers students to design and manage their own research project from start to finish, investigate issues of social injustice, equity, and public policy, and produce research that has potential to influence conversations well beyond the classroom. Each of the research associates you will hear today has chosen a topic that they are passionate about, issues that connect directly to today's most pressing challenges. They've asked difficult questions, sought out answers through evidence and analysis, and developed thoughtful recommendations for the future. What makes this work so special is that it comes directly from the next generation of leaders. These students are not waiting to grow to make a difference. They are doing it now. Today we'll hear from several of our independent researchers as they share their projects, their findings, and their perspectives on challenges and opportunities ahead. As you listen, we encourage you to think about the fresh lens these young researchers bring to their subjects. Their work is not only academically sound, it's driven by lived experience, empathy, and the belief that change is possible. So, without further ado, it is my honor to introduce to you the Teen Think Tank Project's NextGen Research Incubator. All right, and first up, Leo Sandoli. Leo will be talking about the Arlington, Virginia housing crisis and its effect on fair housing and economic equality in Arlington County, Virginia. Leo, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Matt. So I just want to say good morning and thanks for having me here today. So I'm going to walk you through a report on Arlington's affordable housing crisis. And on the surface, Arlington is a major economic success story. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll find a growing and very serious affordable housing problem. My goal today is to give you a clear, straightforward look at what's happening, why it's happening, and what's being done about it. So if we could just go over to section 1, the paradox of Arlington's affordable housing crisis. So Arlington County is well known for being one of the most economically successful communities in the DC area, with great schools and a high quality of life. But for many residents, the prosperity has a hidden downside, a crushing affordable housing crisis. This isn't just a statistical issue, it's a fundamental challenge to our community's social fabric. The numbers are pretty stark. We have about 24,000 people, over 10% of our population, living below 30% of the area median income. Their earnings, which are often around $49,000 a year for a family of 4, simply just don't align with Arlington's actual cost of living, which is around 3 times that figure. This puts them at high risk of being priced out of the community where they serve. So if we go on to the human impacts, we can see that this crisis isn't abstract. It has a real human cost. It disproportionately affects some of the most vulnerable neighbors. We see it in our immigrant communities where families often work multiple jobs and live in overcrowded conditions just to make rent. For many, a rent increase of just $100 a month can force them to make difficult choices, like giving up a car or foregoing a weekend off. Low-income seniors face similar pressures, struggling with rising HOA fees or property taxes, which sometimes force them to choose between essentials like food or keeping their houses warm. And for individuals experiencing homelessness, the barriers to housing are immense, often due to high costs and poor credit histories. So the root causes. What are the root causes of this problem? How do we get here? The problem is a mix of economic and historical factors. First, there's a big gap between the wages many essential workers earn and what it actually costs to live here. The people who provide our childcare, clean our offices, and work in our restaurants and retail stores simply can't afford to live in the communities they serve. Second, perhaps more fundamentally, our housing crisis is a direct result of historical and current zoning laws. These policies, which were once a while ago explicitly aimed to segregate communities, have evolved today to limit density. Today, over 73% of residential land in Arlington is zoned exclusively for single-family homes. This practice has created a shortage of land that could be used to build more dense and affordable housing units. So this lack of supply as a result of zoning practices in combination with high demand to live in Arlington has made living here more expensive. So what are some solutions that the county's put in place and what are their limits? So the county has started to address this with a few key approaches. The first is the Expanded Housing Options, or EHO program. This policy, which went into effect in July 1st, 2023, allows for the construction of 2 to 6 unit buildings in areas that were previously zoned for single-family homes. That's a great step in the right direction, with a projected 20 lots being converted per year. The current scale of the program just simply isn't enough to solve a problem that affects over 24,000 people. The second approach involves public-private partnerships, or PPPs. A great example of this collaboration is Amazon, where they provided crucial funding to preserve affordable units at the Barcroft Apartments. These partnerships leverage private capital to create affordable housing, but they often focus on moderate income homes rather than the deeply affordable units needed for the most vulnerable residents. Finally, we we have a direct government subsidies and programs like the Federal Housing Choice Voucher Program, which serves as a crucial safety net. However, demand for these vouchers is much higher than the supply, and finding a landlord who will accept the vouchers as well could also be a challenge. So what are some recommendations I have moving forward? So moving forward, to address this problem, it'll require a multifaceted approach. We can't solve this with a single policy. So my recommendations would be to expand zoning reform. We need to increase the scale and the scope of the EHO program. We also need to focus PPPs on deep affordability. We should structure the public-private partnerships to prioritize housing for the lowest income residents. We could also look at nonprofit partnerships to make rent cheaper as opposed to for-profit private partnerships with a profit incentives to rise up their rent collections. We could also look to increase direct support. We need to advocate for more federal and local funding for housing vouchers and other subsidy programs. Also, we could look to promote living wages. We must address the root economic cause of the crisis by supporting initiatives that help residents earn a living wage that aligns with the cost of living here in Arlington. And perhaps most importantly, we need to proactively engage with the community to address their concerns and build support for these changes. So, conclusion. In conclusion, Arlington's housing crisis is a complex issue, but it's one we can solve. The development plans must be strategic and purposeful so that we can provide affordable housing in places that can take on more density while also not eroding the fabric of the suburban single-family housing communities throughout Arlington. It will take sustained political will, innovative collaboration, and a genuine commitment to creating a community where everyone, regardless of their income, can afford to live. And that's it. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Leo. Fantastic job. Really appreciate that effort. And it was a blast watching this project come to fruition. It is one of my favorite projects in all the years of working with teen researchers. This one has stood out for a number of reasons. One, the conversation around economic equality and fair housing is very relevant for the Teen Think Tank Project right now. We are engaged in a number of initiatives that are focusing on this type of work in our own communities. This is the first time an individual researcher has taken such a granular look at the issues of housing instability and economic inequality in their own backyard. So I guess the first question is how does it feel to be a change agent?
It feels great. I saw this opportunity and I couldn't pass it up. And, actually getting accepted and going through the program and, trying to research real problems that like affect me and my whole county is, it's great.
Let's talk about some of the problems in your county and dive into a few of the questions that really your research has raised, and I think that's an important part of the research that we do here is that it makes people think, makes people wonder what they can do and what the future holds. And one of the things that stuck out to me in your research and presentation is this idea of the missing middle. Elaborate on that concept and what are the pros and cons associated with developing this missing middle as a potential solution, and how could its impacts affect your community?
Yeah, so just to touch on it real quickly, the missing middle is housing types like duplexes and triplexes and townhomes. And they're called that because they're the middle ground between the large portion of single family homes and the high-rise apartment buildings in the already developed areas of Arlington. And a major pro of them is that they can add density and more housing options to a neighborhood without drastically changing its feel or its look. They can also be affordable to build and buy. The downside, however, is a significant community resistance that we're seeing. Residents often have valid concerns about increased traffic, parking, and a general change to the neighborhood character that they're used to. It's a critical part of the strategy because it directly addresses the shortage of diverse housing types caused by restrictive zoning, offering a path to affordability that isn't only large-scale development. However, recently in, I think, July, all 5 county board members passed the missing middle. So you're able to essentially eradicated single-family housing zoning. So you could build pretty much anything anywhere. So that's still a very much an ongoing issue, and it's very polarizing in our county, but it's still ongoing. So it's kind of hard to address it here.
Okay. Furthermore, in your research, you point out that over 24,000 individuals live below 30% of the area median income. So, given that the expanded housing options program is projected to add only a limited number of units per year, is the county's response truly proportional to the magnitude of the problem? Are they going to do enough?
Yeah, that's a very important question. But while the EHO program is like a significant symbolic step, as currently structured, doesn't have like the magnitude to address this crisis. And the research shows that the projected addition of only 20 lots per year, even if each yields a few units, is unlikely to meaningfully address the problem needed for 24,000 individuals living below 30% AMI. This is why the paper emphasizes the EHO as a foundational shift, but it needs to be scaled up a lot more and coupled with other initiatives to like become an actual like comprehensive solution that fixes this problem. So zoning reform alone won't like solve this problem, but it is a multi-pronged approach. So we need a few other options.
Okay. One of those options that you talk about is the public-private partnerships. In your paper, you particularly mentioned Amazon. There is a tension between the deep affordability and workforce housing within that discussion. How can Arlington's policies be secured to ensure that these partnerships prioritize the most vulnerable residents and not just those in the high income bracket?
Yeah, so this tension is very important. Well, private partners like Amazon bring in like a lot of important capital. Their investments often naturally gravitate towards less risky projects and target higher income brackets because at the end of the day, they are for profit, and its main incentive isn't to ensure that the partnerships prioritize deep affordability. Their prioritization is profit. And so Arlington would need to increase its direct financial contributions. So this could include covering like infrastructure costs or providing significant subsidies. And by doing so, the county can incentivize private developers to take on projects that serve our most vulnerable residents, which can bridge the economic gap that market-based solutions can't fill by themselves. So if we get some more county help to incentivize this kind of solutions, we can make it work.
You talk about vulnerable citizens and underrepresented individuals within the community, and zoning laws are a prime culprit of creating a segregation that perpetuates that that area of underserved individuals. How does understanding this history of racial segregation in zoning laws inform a more effective and equitable approach to zoning reform and housing policy today?
So understanding the history is crucial because it like reframes the issue from being simply about land use to being about social justice. So the research shows that zoning in Virginia was not a like just a planning tool. It was a way to enforce racial segregation after the Supreme Court declared explicit racial zoning unconstitutional. So these policies evolved to limit density, which effectively excluded lower income households and people of color. When we reform zoning today, we're not just increasing housing supply, we are actively working to dismantle a system that was designed to create inequity years ago, and we're still feeling that inequity today. And so this historical context makes it clear that zoning reform is a powerful tool for promoting social justice and creating a more inclusive and equitable community in Arlington, Virginia.
Beyond the statistics, you highlighted that there's a human cost behind the housing crisis. Discuss more about how this housing insecurity creates a ripple effect, specifically on the health and educational outcomes of families, real life problems for real life people. And what does that mean for the community as a whole?
Yeah, so the paper does highlight that housing insecurity does have a very significant ripple effect that goes far beyond just paying rent. So, for example, families who pay a disproportionate amount for housing have to cut back on other essentials like healthy food, health, or healthcare. And it also shows that adults in unaffordable housing are more likely to suffer from depression and higher stress levels. And their children also feel the impact in less one-on-one time or parental time. So when you multiply this like across the entire community of Arlington, the effects are profound. It means that the housing crisis isn't just like a social welfare issue, it's an economic and public health imperative because it undermines the well-being of the workforce and the families that make this community function, right? So these ripples have a huge impact.
Speaking of impact, what has this research meant to you as a citizen of Arlington? Like, how has it influenced you? How has it influenced your perspective? How has it influenced your decision-making process? How has it influenced your potential career path? Was this just a summer project, or was this something more? Was this a springboard to something that you are interested and passionate about pursuing well beyond our time together?
Yeah, so let's start from like the beginning part. So it felt good kind of just to go in depth on this like very complicated policy that is Arlington zoning and missing middle and other development projects. And I didn't know that I was going to do this coming in. So like we obviously worked together to decide like where I wanted to go with my research. And I think doing my research on such a crucial and relevant topic, especially in my community, was very interesting. And I feel like doing that in the future would definitely be like also very interesting. Like that you're creating a real change guide to fixing some big problems in communities and nationwide. So in the future, going towards the research route with like a think tank, that definitely I feel like now that I have a taste of it, like it's definitely something that I can see in the future.
You talk about not knowing that you were going to focus on the areas that you focused on during your research. How did that experience differ from your traditional educational module where you take a class and the end results are prescribed and the process that you engage in is relatively controlled? What was this experience like, and kind of compare and contrast them in relation to your preferred learning style and your preferred educational outcomes?
Yeah, so I had a lot of freedom, especially because we were in like the incubator and not in the full team. So I could really go. We were doing almost like a guided learning for a week or two, and I really had a chance to pick which areas interested me most, like whether it was economics or social impediments or like policy legal impediments. And I also got to choose where exactly I wanted to focus and what particular issue. So I ended up being really interested in economics, more specifically affordable housing, and even more specifically in my county of Arlington, Virginia. So I think that is obviously very different than when we're talking about doing a project for school, right? Where you're getting, the teacher already knows what you're doing going ahead, and you have almost like a step by step that you're supposed to do, right? So I think that that lack of choice in school is very different from what we did here. And I thought, for me, my learning style, I thought this was very cool. Like I've never done something like this before, where you get to like choose wherever your project wants to go, and like kind of do your own thing. And it ended up being very fun. So like I think I didn't know this was my preferred learning style, but I could definitely see that being something that I look into.
Where do you go from here? You spent the last 6 weeks, I'm sorry, the last 3 weeks looking at this subject matter, and we're going to part ways, and you're going to head back to Arlington. What's next?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did have a ton of time to do this research project, and I still feel as if this, maybe it's just the issue I picked, but this missing middle issue is so complicated. So what I do plan to do potentially is, I actually have my friend's dad is actually the head of city planning in Arlington. So I feel like getting to talk to him potentially about my research and becoming more like educated and involved in this specific topic that is probably the most polarizing in my entire county right now could definitely, I guess, be a direction that I go to get a even more, education on this topic, to make an even better policy outline that is even more relevant. And afterwards, that you could obviously I could take it to, the school, and seeing who's interested in this, right? Who wants to help me with this problem? How can we organize, right? And doing that, and starting maybe like some sort of coalition to maybe get to our county board members who all voted for this, but in a very different way, right? So our county board members voted to essentially get rid of almost all zoning laws, and that's not a smart thing to do necessarily, right? So getting this education, this information here, this outline, taking it to the expert in the county, and then using that together to talk with peers to make change as a movement is definitely a direction I see myself potentially going.
So here's the $64,000 question, I guess, is do you believe that you and your generation are in a position to address the issue of housing justice in Arlington County? Is change on the horizon? And are you hopeful that you can get it done?
Yeah, in Arlington County, I'm very hopeful. I think our youth is very involved in this process. We have like thousands of NGOs in here, and there's a lot of just civic engagement in our county. So I think getting our youth to hop on to that civic engagement that's already very prevalent, to create change in our county, especially for affordable housing, is very possible, and we are in a position to do it, right? But we're not in the positions of power. But the more voices you have, the more chances at change you get. So we can do it here in Arlington. Nationwide, I don't know, right? That's a very different issue. But here in Arlington, I don't see why not.
Awesome. We'll get you out of here on this final point. What kind of advice would you give to teen researchers and change agents in your position that are in places that the problem is just as dire, but the potential results do not appear to provide as much hope? Places like Los Angeles or New York City or the rural parts of America where there are teens just like you. looking at this same problem and wondering what it is they can do. And maybe their outcomes don't appear as hopeful as they do in Arlington, Virginia. What advice would you give them?
So I hate to sound cliche here, but anything is possible, right? If in our, I guess, policy structure here in the United States, you as a constituent in your area, if you get a coalition together, you have the voice to influence your elected officials. And if you get enough people, they have to listen, right? You're the ones that put them there. You're the ones that could take them out. So you need to be able to get multiple people on board with you to influence, people in positions of power, right? And that's I guess the beauty of our democratic government, right? And there's obviously holes in that process, right? Through maybe like some money and politics and whatnot, but your voice can always be heard. So if what you're trying to do is make change, you need to research what you're doing so you know exactly how to do it and what to do. You need to get people on board, and you need to go use your voice, or collectively use your voices to make some change.
Leo, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Great job. Look forward to seeing your great work in the future.
Thanks a lot, Matt. This was great. Thanks for having me.
All right, next up, Toshani Jaladii will continue our discussion surrounding economic equality and housing justice in America. So without further ado, Toshani, take it away.
Hi, my name is Toshani Jaladii. I am from Bridgewater, New Jersey, and I currently attend Bridgewater Raritan High School. And I was a part of the economic inequality topic for the Change Agent Academy. And I researched how to, or the economic impediment and social impediment, kind of both sides to the issue. So for my research, I decided to look at a specific kind of topic, which was called breaking the cycle. So I looked at three different prongs, which are for affordable housing. So I looked at education and employment and just the housing market and any barriers in terms of that for my research. So to start, there's a lot of issues that go around when trying to find affordable housing. And it's very prominent, especially in low income areas and low income families. But for us, the first thing, affordable housing is always key to stability and opportunity. But there are so many people around the world that aren't able to gain the access to this opportunity and are then forced to be pushed into a cycle of poverty that is a lot more challenging to break out of. And this could be due to rising rents and a lot of stagnant incomes. And so that's why I wanted to look at housing, education, and the employment barriers that trap these families and what can be done about it. So the first one I want to focus on is the housing barriers to economic equality. When it comes to housing, there's a lot of historical and systemic racial segregation, and it impacts a lot of access for these families. So things like government policy, which limits where minorities could live. For example, there's redlining and zoning laws that are going on, and it reduced affordable housing supply, especially for minority communities like Black and Hispanic families. And this just perpetuates this cycle of poverty and increases the inequality. And it's not just in that time, but it's also generational, because these families will have children that are also forced into this cycle of poverty. And these children are also going to have to struggle and have a much harder time trying to break out of this cycle and live a more successful life than their parents were able to. This also kept a lot of families trapped in unstable housing and a lot of low opportunity neighborhoods. So they weren't able to keep up with the rest of the corporate American world and all of those in better positions than they are. Next, there's also a lot of structural and policy barriers that limit affordable housing supply. So there's going to be local rules within communities, and these local rules restrict a lot of, for example, multifamily housing, and this drives up a lot of rents, and it reduces the available rental units for these people. but also this can lead to overcrowding and instability for these low-income families. So not only do they not have any access to affordable housing, they're also having a lot of worse living conditions, and they're also going to be living in these very, very crowded areas, which isn't very like, it's not a really nice opportunity for them either. There's also a lot of efforts, though, that are going on to increase affordable housing for these low-income families. But there's another barrier that they face, and this is resistance from the existing residents, which slows this progress. There's a lot of community opposition, and it has a very big role in perpetuating this inequality that stems from not only systemic and historical barriers, but just perpetuating cycle. So something I discussed was local residents and how they often resist new affordable housing projects because of a not in my backyard attitude or mentality. This resistance often slows development, and it reflects a lot of deeper racial and class biases. And older and wealthier homeowners, I was able to find through my research, often dominate these public meetings, and they often block projects that could help the low income families because they would like to see change, but they just don't want to see this happening within their own communities. This opposition keeps affordable housing scarce, and it also increases a lot of economic and racial divides. So now I want to talk about the education and employment challenges these families that are in poverty face because they're not able to afford a house. There's a lot of inequitable access and support in higher education for these low-income students. A lot of low-income students face many hurdles in pursuing higher education because they're often burdened with the fact that they might have to help their family back at home, or they don't have enough money to afford the things that their classmates or their peers can afford just because they come from a lower income background. So they have to often attend underfunded schools within their own communities, which also prevents them from even wanting to move on and go to college because their schools tend to not have as many resources as other schools in higher income areas do. So they have fewer resources, and high tuition block can also block their access and any way they want to if they want to pursue a higher education. And for example, I also researched some financial aid, and financial aid, even though low income students can apply and most likely get a lot more financial aid than others, some financial aid, for example, like Pell Grant, hasn't been able to keep pace with the rising costs, and it also increases the debt and dropout risk. So not only can they not rely on financial aid, they're also given a lot of instability with the financial aid they're given because of the fact that they might not keep up with all of the rising costs that happen in college and a lot of the like barriers that these low income students have to face financially and at home. So it's a huge burden on these students to even want to pursue a higher education because they just don't have the resources to. There's also a lot of structural discrimination and credential barriers when it comes to employment. So job seekers face a lot of discrimination based on their race, criminal background, and credit history because they are background checked every time they want to apply for a job. But there's also another barrier here within employment, and that also comes from the systemic racial biases that people have placed in our country, which is just continuing on and on every single year. So even if they are qualified enough for the job, they're always going to pick, for example, someone that is white or more privileged, or someone that has more connections with the company that they want to work at. They will always choose them, even if they're less experienced, over the person that is struggling, the low income, because they face a lot of discrimination. And studies show that people of color get a lot less callbacks, even with better qualifications. So even if they're more qualified, they always have to compete with this counterpart of those that are more wealthy, high income. And this also just perpetuates this cycle of poverty because there are people that are trying to break out of poverty, but there's always another barrier that's going to stop them from being able to get a job and try to break out of this cycle and stop living like that and want to become those that have more income. There's also, in terms of background checks and credential requirements, these disproportionately exclude low income and minority applicants. And there's also limited access to a lot of professional networks and transportation that further constrains these opportunities for to be able to break out of the cycle of poverty. And this is just a whole structure kind of like method that we follow when it comes to the corporate American world, which is just why poverty is constantly an issue that is brought up, because no one has ever tried to really fix the issue. They all want to fix the issue because they know it's a very leading problem in America, but they just don't have the effort, they just don't put the effort in to kind of dive in and delve into the root causes of why these people cannot break out of this cycle. So there's also workforce development, and I also have some proposed solutions to break this cycle. Workforce programs that provide skills and training and these internships and mentoring can also help. I discussed this in terms of an educational expectation. So these low income students, the number one thing they face is not being able to have resources for their like educational life in order to get further. So I wanted to have kind of these programs that help these students that would give them a lot more assistance. And they're also one-on-one mentors. So these people can really focus on one issue that these students have and kind of help them out. So it's very need-based and not just, oh, here's like an overview of what we think would help you. I also talked about just expanding affordable housing. So I was thinking about encouraging some partnerships between wealthy investors, local organizations that specialize in housing development and affordable housing. So there's a lot of nonprofit housing groups and community land trusts, and these individuals that are all about doing good with their money all can invest within these nonprofits, even if they're not for profit. It's just a better thing to be able to provide them with any materials or resources in order to help them build these houses for these low income families. And they can also earn returns on this and help create stable, affordable homes for these low income families. And to overcome this neighborhood resistance that was also known as NIMBYism, local governments could design incentive-based programs. So the whole issue is that they don't want these houses to be in their own neighborhoods, but they might let it happen if they were also benefiting somehow from these programs, from these affordable housing units being built in their neighborhoods. So I said that governments could maybe design incentive-based programs that benefit these existing residents. So, for example, landlords that agree to rent to low-income tenants could receive maybe tax breaks or subsidies or guaranteed rent protections. And programs like these are not going to only reduce the risk for property owners, but also make affordable housing more politically acceptable. And also, cities can repurpose underutilized bases into affordable units. So even if they aren't given the materials to help facilitate building these houses, there's so many abandoned buildings that they could utilize and use in order to create houses or temporary houses before these low-income families can get back up on their feet and try to break out of this cycle on their own. But just for a little support for them right now, this is probably one of the best things that a community and these organizations as themselves can do. So converting these old barns, warehouses, motels into housing could also be a very successful plan, especially because it's already been done in areas such as Los Angeles. So finally, I also mentioned partnering with developers and nonprofits, and this can also require affordability clauses in new projects while also allowing developers to profit. So I wanted to make sure that everyone benefits and it's not just one group. Higher education is also a very powerful tool. It is what I believe in to break the cycle of poverty, but access has to be truly equitable. So to achieve this, colleges and universities should expand their need-based scholarships and create some outreach programs that can extend just beyond financial literacy for entire families. So it's not just the child that is learning about financial literacy, but it's also the parents that are able to learn about financial literacy. This not only lifts the burden off these students that have to teach their parents how to be smart with their money, but it also allows these families to be able to learn about how to spend their money, learn about how to invest, and learn about how to become those higher individuals that they always wanted to become. And there's also just community financial education workshops that could be led by these universities. And this could help the low income households learn about budgeting, credit building, savings, which would also lessen this financial pressure that is placed on the college students to support their families. Universities could also develop some student aid or reinvestment programs. So this would basically just encourage recipients of scholarships or grants to save through mechanisms, such as something that we discussed was the Rule of 72. And this illustrates how investments can basically double over time. And teaching students how to begin saving at 18 could also ensure that financial aid provides not only short-term relief, but also long-term wealth building opportunities. So they don't have to continue this cycle of poverty for their children, but maybe they can start building the generational wealth that they would have wanted for themselves for their own children. And we could pair direct aid with financial literacy so students are positioned to graduate without debt and they can enter adulthood with the foundation for stability. And like I mentioned, the mentorship programs within high schools, higher institutions, and this could just very, very, very help like the low income college students and aid them on a need-based system. So for employment, I wanted to really focus on how investments should focus on expanding the workforce development programs. So this could equip these individuals with technical skills, professional experience, and a lot of urban residents sometimes face barriers, which is limited access to training. So I really wanted to target that and be able to kind of allow them to overcome these language barriers or this discrimination, because if they're taught the skills that those higher above them are taught, they could also excel the same way without having to face all the discrimination that they already do, thinking that they're not able to do it. So these programs could combine skills training, paid internships, career mentoring, and it could really close the gap that was created when it came to the cycle of poverty. And I wanted to really emphasize local partnerships. A lot of my solutions are based on local partnerships because I do believe it's a huge team effort when it comes to trying to break this cycle. So I discussed local partnerships with community colleges, nonprofits, private companies. This could really support the upward mobility that we're all looking for when it comes to breaking this cycle, especially community colleges because they're very well positioned to develop short-term programs a lot, and a lot of people can, these are like open access for many people to be able to join, and it could really help people to attend these programs if they align with regional labor market needs, and these would ensure that students graduate with the skills directly applicable to these open jobs. So just in terms of conclusion, the economic inequality in cities is deeply tied to three main things, which is housing, education, and employment barriers. And these affordable housing shortages, unequal education, and job discrimination often trap families in poverty cycles, which are very hard to break out of and very hard to even think to break out of because it's just always been a constant everyday cycle. And to try to change that without the support of others around them is a lot harder it is than a whole community trying to help them break out of this cycle. So fixing this does mean having to invest in community housing partnerships, equitable educational support, and workforce training. And breaking these barriers is key to giving these families a real shot at stability, success, and most importantly, the American dream that everyone is always striving to achieve. Thank you for listening to my research, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.
Toshani, excellent job. Appreciate the work that you put in this summer. Appreciate you for committing to exploring such an important issue. You have officially crossed that threshold from teen researcher to change agent. You are out there, you are doing it, you are understanding the problems, you are attempting to make others understand the problem and take action. First question, how does that feel?
It feels very rewarding. I'm glad I was able to not only just glaze a topic, but kind of dive into the main reasons of why a problem is called perpetuating and why an issue just keeps persisting, even though there's been so many efforts in the past to try to change that. So I'm glad I was able to not just look at it from a high schooler perspective, but be able to look at it in an economic, social, legal kind of focus on all three and see which ones I was able to kind of delve into and research the most.
Fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about your findings. Let's talk a little bit about the impressions that this research has had on you and your perceptions of economic equality and housing stability. Donna Gallup, one of our thought leaders that we had access to through our programming, talks about this concept of housing first. This idea that yes, there are problems with education. There are problems with employment. There are problems with mental health. There are problems with addictions. But until you address the housing crisis, until you provide affordable housing for all, those other problems are secondary because you can never solve them if you do not have proper stability when it comes to housing. Um, do you agree? And how do we make people understand that perception? How do we make people understand that position?
Yeah, so I definitely do agree with that opinion. I definitely do believe that housing is very key and essential to stability, and it has helped so many people be able to do their jobs, live their lives, because they always have a specific place to return to rest, relax, get all of the rest that they need, and be able to go on with a new day and be able to, live their lives. But the thing is, there are so many people that don't have that, not even privilege or right. They just don't have that basic necessity, and they're unable to even kind of move forward in their lives because they're always wondering how they're going to even make it through the next day without the key to stability, which is housing. And this has definitely kind of changed my perspective because usually people don't really think about housing. The first thing they kind of think about when it comes to poverty is, oh, these people just need to go out and get a job. But the thing is, they need to have any form of stability first in their lives, and that comes with the housing, but it's the one component that they don't have. And what people fail to realize is the only reason they're able to kind of move on with their days, get on with their everyday lives, is because they always had a place to go to. But these people don't even have that. I really wanted to kind of just emphasize the fact that you have something that everyone should have, but they don't, which is why there's this huge cycle, and really open up their eyes to that because it's not just about jobs, but there's so many like reasons why poverty can like persist, and housing is just one of them, and it's also one that should be considered more.
I think one of the common responses from the average member of society
Mhm.
to that conversation would be, well, it's in everybody's purview. It's in within everybody's control to be able to control their circumstances and elevate themselves. So, if housing is a problem in this particular area, if education is a problem in your particular area, if employment is a problem in your particular area, well, just rise up, work harder, and move into a neighborhood that has better housing, better employment, better educational opportunities. And there you can at least keep incrementally improving your situation and moving your way up the ladder. Um, Given the discussion that you had about NIMBYism, what are your thoughts on that idea that, hey, listen, if you just want a better life, make a better life for yourself. If you want to live in a better neighborhood, just move into a better neighborhood. Is that practically possible in all situations, given your experience and the research that you've conducted?
Definitely not as easy said to be done, like said as it is done. There's so many like barriers, just as I mentioned, for these people to face. And even if they move into these better areas, they're often going to face discrimination. They're going to face a lot of bias. And to get a job in these areas, to be able to move up from a lower level to a higher level is a big jump. And to be able to adjust to that life also, they're not used to not living in poverty. So when they're not living in poverty, they tend to not know how to, move on with their lives from now. So they have the house, but how is the job market gonna be for them? How are their neighbors gonna treat them? And NIMBYism has a huge role in how that plays because these people, they have a community, but there are other people trying to get into their community and they want change and they're unaware of the fact that this is good change, but they don't want that change happening to them. And based on my research, I found a lot about even if these people move into these neighborhoods, there's obviously always going to be some form of opposition in their lives. And it doesn't really change much because even if they've broken out of this cycle of poverty, they still have to work harder than the average privileged person that's been given a house since they were born, that's not had to work as hard because their parents were able to work hard for them. Because right now, those that just broke out of poverty need to start building that generational wealth that these privileged people already have. And it just makes it a lot harder. So telling them, oh, just now you could just have a house, you should work harder, you should be able to start building this, isn't as easy for them as it was for those that are saying to build this wealth.
What would you say to those communities, to those individuals, to those families, to the businesses in those neighborhoods, in those, backyards that are resistant to that development, to that inclusion? Like at their heart, they're probably decent people. They want to see
Mhm.
the security, both financially and housing, be made available to everyone, but they just don't want it. They just don't want it in their neighborhood, right? How would you appeal to them? What would you say to those folks to kind of get them on board?
I would
How do we,
definitely
yeah, how do we change their mind?
I would definitely say, even if I wasn't going like one of the people building the houses, I know one of my solutions was definitely talking about the incentives, but just in a moral stance, I would say like if you want to be those that want to make change and do good in the world, the first step is acceptance, and just wanting it isn't enough, but doing something about it is a lot more. So you can't preach that you want good, but also stop it from happening because it's happening near you. So it's kind of like even if you're not directly affecting how poverty cycles work, you're indirectly supporting poverty by not allowing those that are in poverty to kind of try to break out of it. So you're preventing them indirectly, but you preach for good. So definitely think about it in a moral stance. That could be you, and there's so many people that are opposing you trying to come in and live a better life similar to theirs, but they're not letting you. How would that make you feel? And think about how it makes all of these people in poverty feel, because there's not just it's not just a small group of people. There's a large amount of people that are in poverty, and there's so many people with this NIMBYism mentality that it hinders them. And also, this is why we call it a poverty cycle, because there's so many barriers, but there's also no community support for it. But there are people that are saying they want the change, but they're not letting it happen. So definitely just think about it in a moral stance. Before I even mention the incentives, if you want to be a good person, you're going to have to let the change happen in front of you, not just preach for it.
Yeah, I guess it's really the embodiment of the old saying, either you're part of the solution or you're part of the problem.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
that's very, very astute. Um, in your solutions, you talk about this idea of affordable housing development, and in the state of New Jersey, where we both reside, um, is a concerted effort that has been codified, has been turned into law, and has opened the door to create affordable housing within each municipality in New Jersey. The New Jersey Fair Housing Act requires each town to provide a level of affordable housing based on a standardized metric that has been developed through lawsuits and negotiations over time,
Mm.
over the last 40 years. So we think we have made a step in the right direction in requiring this affordable housing to be developed. But as you can imagine, in practice, there are towns and there are municipalities and there are politicians who are trying to either sidestep the law by finding loopholes or just flat out ignoring it and deciding that they are going to challenge this idea that they are required to allow affordable housing to be developed, not even support it from government funds, support it from local funds. The towns aren't required to build it themselves. They're just simply required to allow this development to happen and make the proper changes within their town zoning and ordinance to facilitate this. As an advocate, as a researcher, what is our responsibility? What is your responsibility? What can we do to ensure that these towns, that these legislators, that these politicians are adhering to not only what is right, but what the law requires? What's the next step for us as we advocate for fair housing in an attempt to support economic equality?
Yeah, so in terms of policy, I definitely do think there's a lot of collaboration that goes on, whether it be the policymakers making these policies together or it be those in the community. And policymakers, one thing I definitely discussed was their first priority should be what their people want, because there was no point for them to be in the jobs that they have without thinking about their people. So should be a lot of communication going on from the people to these policymakers. But what really sparks the change for policymakers is when it's one of them against entire communities. So all of these people are advocating for the same change. All of these people want the same change. And something that I think would really be eye-opening for them is seeing how all these people want this change, and the only person that's hindering it from happening are these policymakers. So just because one person wants something doesn't really inspire these policymakers to make that happen. But if they see many thousands, lots of people want the same change, it's a lot more inspiring for them to see it. And this happens only through communication. So definitely having people have this sort of person they go to, this communication that's going on between them, and this communication is delivered straight to these policymakers. It is challenging to get these policymakers to kind of change their minds sometimes, because they might not be as open-minded, or they might be a little bit stubborn over the policies that they're making because they don't believe that what the people want is the most important right now. But it's the fact that it's endless and tireless advocacy for the same thing that inspires them to start believing. So the first cause, or the first reason, is to make sure these policy believers believe that what the people are advocating for has become the number one priority over everything else.
Well said. Final question. We'll get you out of here on this, but it's a big one. It's an important one.
Mhm.
Do you think there is hope that we can successfully provide economic equality for all Americans in your lifetime? This is a problem that your generation is going to inherit from my generation and those before me. Um, Unfortunately, it has now become your responsibility to tackle, but I feel like we are in good hands. Do you think we are in good hands? Do we have hope of solving this problem within your lifetime?
Definitely, I believe that it's poverty has become such a huge issue, even though the problem's been handed over to my generation from yours. But it's obviously, if it was still an issue during your generation, it's probably been an issue through the generation before yours. So it's definitely a huge problem to tackle. And maybe the entire problem can't be solved within our lifetimes, but definitely, I do believe there's going to be some changes that will happen because there are so many young advocates for poverty and they want to fix and change the system that we have. There's so many people in terms of the government that want this change to happen, or they want to. There's so many people in within my generation that believe that they want this change, and there's people researching it, like I am over here, and there's people that are joining these organizations, maybe creating these organizations to want to do this good, even if it might not be solved within this generation. I definitely do think there's more opportunities for people within my generation to try to break out of this cycle because it's become a lot of a bigger problem. A lot more focus has been put on this problem, and there's a lot more people that are willing to make the sacrifices for these changes because they would like equal opportunity for everyone. Even if government can't really interfere or help with it, there's a drive and there's a motivation among a lot of youth, a lot of adults, and because we have this advocation and because I like to believe that my generation is very stubborn when it comes to their opinions. They would like for those older than them, like their parents, to be able to be part of their opinions, know about their opinions, kind of teach them that this is what's going on now and this is what we need to adapt to. And that's something I really like about my generation is that we are very opinionated, and once we have an opinion, we want everyone to know about it and we want everyone to help us make the changes that we would like to make. So even if the whole issue can't be solved as a whole because it is called a cycle for a reason, I definitely do think it could be, you know, lessened the burden on other people, and we could definitely help others try to break out of this cycle, which can also lead to this chain reaction of helping more people break out of the cycle. So it kind of just starts with a small issue and goes into like this big chain reaction. And even if it's not completely solved, it's definitely going to be easier and easier as the generations go to solve this issue.
Well said. I think we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Toshani, fantastic work. It has been a pleasure working and collaborating with you this summer.
Thank
I
you.
am excited to see what happens next, where you go, and what change you are able to influence. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Enjoy. Take care. All right, next up, Savonne Johnson, who will be discussing housing affordability in the United States. Savonne, welcome.
Hi, Matt. Thank you so much. I am Savonne Johnson once again. I am a rising senior at Linden High School in New Jersey, and I am so excited to be here with Teen Tang Think project. So I was drawn to the economic equality cohort because I just felt like I wanted to learn a little bit more about money and how it's managed, especially within my own country, and how it affects people. And within this cohort, I think I 100% learned so much about that. But I definitely wanted to just dive deeper because I feel like every aspect of life, is deeply connected with economics. So I want to just take a step and look in, see what it provided. Today, we're going to discuss housing affordability within the USA, specifically single-family zoning and its impact on the affordable housing crisis. Let's get started. So our main topic is zoning and its immense impact on the affordable housing crisis as it pertains to single-family zoning and its roots in racial discrimination, influencing economic inequality, NIMBYism, and limited housing supply. So let's just jump right into the historical context of zoning. Essentially, what is zoning and when it got started? So zoning was implemented in the 19th century. In 1908, first zoning code was in Los Angeles, California. It just essentially established residential and industrial districts by use. There wasn't a map. There wasn't much surrounding it. It just stated that you can have homes in this area and you can have industrial buildings in this area. So there was just that generalization, that breakdown of saying, this is where people will reside. This is where the companies will be making materials and doing things that they need to do. So in 1916, that got developed just a little bit more in the New York zoning resolution. So it established map use, height, and area zones. So it just gave it a little bit more of a structure and understanding how housing should be compared, or where it should be compared to the industrial buildings. And then it also took steps into looking at the light and air and how that is flowing in and out of these buildings and where they are being created. In 1924, the Standard State Zoning Enabling Act was created, and essentially this modeled legislation for cities to enact zoning legislations, and it also enacted and enabled people to have things prepared for zoning within their states, and it modeled the language for zoning. So it just got a little bit more technical in 1924, and this was really the basis of zoning and when it took off. And then in 1926, Standard State Zoning, Euclid versus Ambler, there was a Supreme Court case where Ambler Realty Company they had a Supreme Court case against Euclid, Ohio. And essentially they were just stating that they felt they were restricted way too much by Euclid, Ohio, when it came to creating and developing housing. And essentially Euclid won the case, the Supreme Court case, because the Supreme Court saw that there should be restrictions on where and how housing is built, what it should contain, and how close it is to these buildings, how close it is to a park, how close it is to work, how the land is going to be mapped out. And they also saw that as a reasonable extension of police power, because they thought that, if there's these things in place, that they don't have to have as much interaction, say, with police, and it helps the police out and the community. Now we're going to get into some exclusionary zoning. So what is exclusionary zoning? Exclusionary zoning laws place restrictions on the types of homes that can be built in a particular neighborhood. They were created around the 19th century due to the public's concern about lighting, air, and fire safety. So if it is, are you accessible? Is light available? Is air available? And is it clean? Is it not polluted? And also, are you close to a fire hazard? Do you have anything to put out the fires near you, fire hydrants? And then these exclusionary zoning laws discriminated against people of color with things like the Fair Housing Act. Although the Fair Housing Act was put in place to help not to discriminate and not to have racism, there's a loophole within Fair Housing Act that doesn't allow for class discrimination, which then again in turn just affects those who are at the lower end, which was those people of color, as well as minorities, and it put them at the lower end in zoning. And in the past, there was redlining, which essentially just established a policy that stated that people in a certain area weren't necessarily qualified to be homeowners. And then there were like the green areas, the red areas. Green areas said, yes, these people can, they are qualified to get housing. The red areas were saying no, that these people don't. Unfortunately, within the red areas, those who could not get housing per se, were those that were people of color, low income. So it didn't help them to establish housing, generational wealth. And in this graphic, this figure in my to my right, the population of high poverty neighborhoods in millions, you can see the difference between a span of time from 1990 to 2013. You get to see the poverty within different communities within the white, Black, and Hispanic neighborhoods. Within the Black community, poverty was at an all-time high, still is, and in the millions. So that's 5 million people in 2013 that were still in poverty or in high poverty neighborhoods, with the difference between the white and Hispanics not being as much, but the white people still not being in as much poverty as the Black and Hispanic people. So what is single family zoning, and was it discriminatory? So single family zoning is essentially a policy that allows for only one type of housing, so single family style housing, to live in a given neighborhood. This leaves out things like apartments and duplexes, so only one type of house without any other more than one family living within that house. It was created in the 20th century. Around the same time, a lot of the zoning and housing legal policies were created and was first introduced in Los Angeles, California, by Mason McDuffie Company. The basis of it was to establish sameness in a community of people that were in the upper class. With that, McDuffie's company wanted to build private residence parks in Berkeley, California, which would set up a clear distinction between the secure, steadily growing property investments in their communities and the harsh, unpredictable, undesirable cities. So this particularly was discriminatory towards the Black and Asian families at the time, as it was built to segregate the rich white communities from Black and Asian minorities that were deemed to be harsh, unpredictable, and undesirable cities. So because of that, there's housing and wealth that coincide. They go together, and that leaves a huge gap between opportunities available, employment, and this opportunity to build generational wealth. So it definitely was discriminatory. And even in this graphic here, in Los Angeles, California, a lot of the housing regulations discriminated against Chinese laundromats, putting them in these industrial areas, which again, in turn, just discriminated and was racial discrimination and segregation between Asians compared to the rich white class. So we're going to continue. The current affordable housing crisis. So the current affordable housing crisis has been fixed, revised, and it's been changed 100,000 times. And essentially, there is the numerous of times that it was made to change was to meet the needs of the people, particularly with lower income, depending on the AMI in a given state. So the idea that there should be affordable housing is known, but it is intersected with so much like factors including education, employment, healthcare, zoning, etc., that makes it a lot more complex. So the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development defines affordable housing as housing for which the occupants are paying no more than 30% of his or her income for gross housing costs, including utilities. That being said, a lot of the low-income Americans are easily paying over 70% or more of their income towards housing alone. This is causing for an increased poverty and crisis amongst the low-income American population. On the right, once again, I have a housing affordability graph, and it just shows how there are a lot more people in the red zone, in the dark red, especially that are paying a lot more than 30% of their income, a lot even as high as 50% and more. And this was just in 2023 overall. We are now 2025. So it has definitely increased since then, where people are still not able to afford housing, and there's such a huge burden on them to pay for housing, which that means that the rest of their money isn't able to be spent evenly to distribute to other things within their life. So now we're going to talk about the gap in affordable housing. So right here we have another map that just shows where or how many houses are available, affordable houses that are available. States like California and Texas, there's not a lot. There's less than 30 or fewer than that. And then in states such as New York, there's between 31 and 40. And it just keeps going. There's a little bit more, but there's still not enough to cover the amount of millions that are in poverty, as we saw in this graph here. You see that there's so many people. Does that amount of housing fit that amount of people? Not necessarily. And so this is why we just have this huge gap with people that don't have as much to afford this amount of housing, the cost of housing, and the fact that there also isn't that much being provided. So now we're going to look into how zoning and the affordable housing crisis are connected. So they're connected through economic inequality, NIMBYism, and limited housing supply. So let's look into that. So economic inequality. So communities within single-family zoning have a huge financial burden on the government and public, as the land typically isn't being used to its full potential. Single-family zoning tends to isolate housing types and requires extensive infrastructure investments like roads, water, and sewer systems over large geographic areas, ultimately driving up municipal costs. Since it is considered private housing, there's a lot more that goes into it, and there are less people there to sustain it. So consequently, it's taking money away from affordable housing due to uneven amounts being used to sustain single-family housing, and the money not being evenly distributed. The government has to put a lot more in place to take care of the single-family housing compared to the multifamily homes that take up maybe the same amount of space as a single-family home, but house more people. So you have that benefit there. Now let's get into NIMBYism. So NIMBY, or the not in my backyard concept, allows for single-family housing to benefit from discriminating against those in public housing in their neighborhood and causing for there to be a systematic and structural disadvantage. So single-family housing creates exclusionary housing and it takes away from the underprivileged. In the United States, NIMBYism has a strong racial and class dimension as it tends to be perpetuated by the white, middle, and upper classes, while minorities communities are often the victims. So they tend to have an upper hand in making decisions, and that forces municipalities to implement more racial and discriminatory regulations around the housing zones. That includes things from direct exclusion of multifamily development to indirect exclusions through cost inflation caused by imposing growth boundaries, all the way down to inefficiently moving proposed projects through the permitted pipeline. Now we're going to jump right into limited land supply. So due to the zoning restrictions of single family housing, only having one home per an amount of land, it limits how much housing can actually be made. This affects affordable housing as it limits the amount of land that can be used to make multiple units of a home. This causes multiple family housing to be denser and more populated in certain areas with less affordability and sustainability. Since land is a finite resource, changing how that land is managed can have a huge impact on housing affordability. When we've seen jurisdictions change their lot size minimums to allow people to buy less and to buy a home, then the home costs less because land is a major component. And that was from Horowitz in 2024. In summary, single-family zoning negatively impacts affordable housing within the USA as it increases economic inequality, sustains and helps NIMBYism, as well as limiting the amount of housing available. Now, although there's a bunch of negatives and that single-family housing does have a negative impact on affordable housing, there are definitely ways that we can fix that. So we're going to look into some proposed solutions. There are several ways to combat zoning, and specifically single zoning and how it negatively affects the affordable housing crisis. And a few of those include getting rid of single family zoning completely. Single family zoning is definitely a very old way of looking at housing and the American dream, saying that we should only have one type of house that only includes one family. Restricts a lot of affordable housing because there are towns where a majority of their housing only is single family zoning, which again puts more pressure on that municipality as well as the government because they need to sustain these huge houses on huge plots of land that they don't have enough room to create affordable housing or housing that includes apartment style buildings and duplexes and triplexes. So getting rid of it will just help in creating and freeing up land space, which in turn would help housing be a little bit more affordable. And the second thing we could do is a bundle zoning reforms, which just essentially means allowing not just single family homes, but apartments, duplexes, triplexes to be in the same area rather than having set areas for them by themselves individually. This just allows for people to live that American dream of having a single family home while also being in a community that fosters apartments as well as triplexes and duplexes, making that a more diverse culture, also adding to the change in allowing more affordable housing so that we can live and reside together. The next thing we can do is maximize population near transit. People need to get to work and make money. That's the only way they can afford the housing and make it more affordable. So allowing for people to be near transit to get to and from work would mean that the jobs are closer to the homes are closer to the jobs, and therefore the housing could be more affordable and there not as much money and income will be spent towards getting to work. The next thing we can do is getting rid of off-site parking. So off-site parking takes up a lot of land as well, which is one of the biggest issues because land is land and it really can increase or decrease, but you can always make and free up space in the land that's given. So having off-site parking forces people to go somewhere else to park, which takes up a huge plot of land in general. Therefore, it can't be used for affordable housing, but now it's just used for parking of cars. By connecting the parking to the actual housing itself, it just allows for a certain minimum or maximum of cars to be towards that given housing. So say you have an apartment and the parking is attached to it and there's maybe 25 say buildings within it, you know that for every house there should maybe be 2 slots of parking available rather than having another designated area for parking in a specific zone that has a maximum or minimum number that doesn't necessarily coincide with the actual residents living there. So you can just see that there are lots of ways that we can definitely combat zoning and the single zoning negative effect on affordable housing crisis. So here are my resources, and I would definitely say take a good look into single family zoning and how it affects affordable housing, as it does have a huge effect on it. And thank you for listening.
Fantastic job, Savonne. Appreciate the hard work and dedication to a very relevant subject. Um, which leads me to my first question: how's it feel to be a change agent?
I think it feels absolutely beautiful to be a change agent. I love that I get to make an impact with my research, as well as being educated on what is actually going on in the world. It just allows me to just be more in the loop and to take charge and be a part of that action and making the world a better place.
How did this experience of becoming a policy researcher and academic researcher differ from some other academic experiences that you've had?
I would say I never had as much, say, hands-on research in a specified subject. Even reading that book, Evicted, and just learning about social, economic, and legal policies and things as that in that nature, just it increased my knowledge on what actual life look like for other people who are, say, living in poverty or dealing with these economic impediments and how they place an effect on my life. So I feel like I just took a deep dive into it that I've never taken before, like in school, where I saw more real world issues and how they even impacted me.
Did the exposure to some of the materials that you mentioned and some of the research that you found, has it impacted where you may go professionally from here?
Definitely, 100%. I took this course on because of the fact that I was interested in business. And so learning more about like legal policies, economic and social impediments definitely helps me to hone on in what I want to do in business and who to look to and talk to it about so that I can see like where do I fall and how can I make this change? Because it has definitely increased my passion for seeing these real world problems and seeing that I do in fact have an effect on them and I can make that a positive effect. So 100%.
Speaking of these real world problems, you focus extensively on the idea of single family zoning and to talk historically why and how these zoning ideas came to fruition throughout history. But my question now is in real time, in this present day, does single family zoning actually benefit those who are within that particular zone?
So the answer to that question is no, actually. So single family zoning is extremely expensive and not just on the government, but on the people themselves. So they have to keep up with their own private per se like systems, like maybe the sewer or um where their electricity bill is going, things like that. They just have to keep up on their own and the government has to manage for that specific zone. And it costs a lot more because there are a lot less people living there. And also it forces them to be in a one type of situation where they're not exposed to unique and diverse areas because there are typically one type of people living in those single family zones. So you're not really seeing what the true world looks like. And therefore, as talking about being a change agent, you can't make change if you don't see something to change. So single family zoning really does limit our growth and access, and especially for those people living in it to see those things and make that change and difference in their communities.
Awesome. Final question. We'll get you out of here on this one. Do you think there's hope we can successfully provide economic equality for all Americans?
100%. I think there's definitely hope. I think being in this program and hearing from other scholars and seeing the amount of passion put into their work, even into mine, there's definitely hope. There are steps that need to be taken. There are people that need to be reached. And I think that as long as there is a continuous and persistent force in doing that, we can definitely achieve that change in economic equality.
Savon, fantastic. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing what your future holds. It is undoubtedly bright, and we are in better hands, leaving the future of our society to scholars like you. Thank you very much. You
Thank you.
take
Thank you.
care.
You too.
Now I'd like to introduce NextGen researcher Grace Park. Grace, welcome.
Hi, hello. My name is Grace Park, and I am a senior in New Jersey, and I go to Northern Valley Regional High School out of Japan. And I originally joined was interested and joined this cohort because I was interested in the social aspect of it. But then through this research, I've gained new knowledge about like the economic part, and I'll be presenting on housing.
Okay. Cool.
Housing injustice in America and why low-income families struggle with housing costs. Prices have risen drastically. As you can see on the graphs, rent is also increasing, making it harder for many families to keep a roof over their heads. This isn't just an urban issue. Families in suburbs and rural areas are also feeling the squeeze. Not only is rent rising, but also the home prices are rising too. While the median household income is well below the housing prices, as you can see in the graph on the right, this is my thesis. Low-income families making less than $80,375 for a family of four are suffering housing injustice due to high housing cost. Too few homes are being built. From the research I have done, I have created this chart comparing the housing supply versus demand. And in the Georgetown-based analysis, it says that in the US, demand has drastically outpaced supply. This imbalance leads to skyrocketing prices and rents. The US has a housing shortage because demand is much higher than supply. The Boston Federal Reserve found that underbuilding has been a major factor in New England's housing crisis. So the lack of new housings in one of the core reasons affordability is out of the reach for many families. In short, without more homes being built, costs will stay high. Since there aren't enough houses being built, the prices go up. As I said in the previous slides, that in the US, demand for housing has dramatically outpaced supply, as you can see in the graph. This means that more people are looking for homes than there are houses available, which drives up prices and rents. According to Champagne, from his policy notes, fewer homes on the market means intense competition, which equals to prices and rents skyrocketing. And also, according to Brookings, in most metro areas in 2022, home prices rose 15% nationwide, while incomes rose only 4%. Restrictive zoning and regulatory barriers. Many cities use zoning laws that block construction of duplexes and apartments. The factors driving housing costs to all-time highs. An article produced in 2024 by Governing, Bray discusses that these rules raise prices between 2% to 250% depending on the city. And these zoning laws keep density low, which equals to fewer homes and equals to higher prices. In San Francisco, it takes over a year to get permits for a project, delaying construction and raising costs. Not only is there regulatory zoning laws, but there is also regulatory barriers. Some of these barriers include exclusionary zoning, which is when many suburbs ban duplexes, triplexes, and apartment buildings, which only single-family homes are allowed. This limits housing density and keeps the supply low, and it raises prices. And there is also minimum lot sizes, and cities often require houses to sit on big plots of land. Larger lots mean fewer houses can be built, and that equals to drives up land and home costs. Height restrictions. Limits on how tall buildings can be. It prevents construction of multi-story apartments in areas with high demand, like in New York City and San Francisco. Lengthy permitting processes. In cities like San Francisco, approval for new housing can take over a year, and delays equal higher costs for developers, which equals to more expensive rent and homes. Impact fees and extra costs. Local government often charge developers high fees for infrastructure infrastructure like roads or schools. These costs get passed down to renters and buyers. And lastly, there is parking requirements. Some cities require 1 to 2 parking spots per housing unit. Building parking garages / lots is expensive, which raises the cost. High financing, insurance, and construction cost. Mortgage rates are near 20-year highs, making borrowing very expensive. From a New York Post, when rates are high, homeowners don't sell, which then equals to supply shrinking, and then the prices of housing stays high. Average monthly mortgage payments are now greater than $3,000, while median U.S. income is $74,580, according to New York Post. Insurance costs are rising sharply, especially in the wildfire, hurricane, and flood zones. According to a Harvard JCHS, between 2020 and 2023, insurance premiums rose 74%, while home prices rose 40%. These added costs make renting and owning less affordable. Climate change and natural disasters are rising risk, so insurance is more expensive. In states like Florida, Texas, and California, some insurers have even stopped offering coverage, which led to fewer choices and higher premiums. Developers and landlords face higher insurance bills too, which means higher rents for the tenants. Not only is insurance and mortgage expensive, but construction materials like lumber, steel, and concrete spiked during COVID and remained 30% more expensive than in 2020. Labor shortages in constructions add more delays and costs. Every extra cost gets passed down to buyers and renters. And as you can see in the chart, it says that average total of the construction cost is $428,000. But when homes are actually sold to people, it rises to about $665,000. From these problems, the solutions that I came up with is increasing federal investment in affordable housing through social housing and tax incentives. A federal social housing construction program could deliver stable, long-term affordable units in high-opportunity areas, offering low-income families better access to safe housings. Experts say such a program could be the most effective antidote to affordability crisis. As it says in an article set from Center for American Progress. The Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, NHIA, proposes tax credits to bridge the value gap in distressed neighborhoods, spurring private developers to create affordable units by making projects financially viable. In an article by Goldberg, it says, and also extending the low-income housing tax credit, the LIHTC, is key. According to HUD data, as of 2025, LIHTC has financed over 3.7 million housing units since 1987, highlighting its effectiveness at scale. These solutions will increase supply, stabilize rents, and give low-income families access to safe housings. And in summary, low-income families earning less than $80,375 for a family of 4 continue to face housing injustice, as rising costs make it harder for them to find safe and affordable places to live. So from from the solutions that I gave, it could be a way to cut. It could be a way to help low-income families to be able to afford housing and get rid of housing injustice. And these are my sources. Thank you.
Thanks, Grace. Great job. how does it feel to be a change agent?
I feel really great because from the research, like as I was researching, being able to like think of solutions and like other ways to help people. And since I'm a low income myself, and I understand like where like people struggle and how they feel, like not personally, but I'm able to like know, like I know how they feel and know where they are, and being able to come up these solutions and to become a change agent is like such an honor to me, and being able to help people is also, I guess, being able to help people in like any way possible is it's a such an honor to me.
Oh, fantastic. It's so great to hear. Has your experience with this research and in this program sparked an interest in economic research and the discussions of economic equality?
Yes. Before this cohort, I never thought I was interested in economics, and I always went past whenever people mention economics or anything. But from doing research on my own and going in depth into these studies and the housing crisis, it really sparked an interest to me and made me want to go dive in deeper and try to find solutions that will maximize help to low income families.
Oh, very cool. Just a couple more questions here for you. Based on that, based on your experience with the subject matter, um, do you think there is hope that we can successfully provide economic equality and housing stability for all Americans?
Um, I'd say yes, there are hope, but it would take a lot longer than people like want it to take, because of how much like society already has like this expectations and everything, and like social norms, and um so even though there are solutions to help those low income families, it would take a long time to like fix them, because not everybody wants to like go along with the solution. But yes, I think there is a hope for economic equality.
As long as we have hope, we have a chance, right?
Yes.
And the final question is, has this experience looking at this subject matter, conducting this type of research and working with others who are interested in this subject, has it changed you any as a student, as a leader, as a future professional? What are you taking away from this experience?
It actually quite changed me a lot, because being able to work with people with similar interests and being able to hear different perspectives of other people, it actually helped me gain more knowledge and be more a better leadership, like for people that I can teach, and for also my other leadership roles. And I can take away actually a lot from this program, and not only like the research part of it, but also like the knowledge I gained like to be a better leadership, and like the other perspectives of like the perspective of the other people, and it actually made me broaden my view and not stay narrow.
Grace, thank you very much. We look forward to seeing all the great work that you do in the future. Thank you
Thank
very much.
you.
Please join me in welcoming Meher Dua. Meher is a researcher in the Teen Think Tank Project's NextGen Incubator Independent Research Program, and today she will be presenting her findings on the impediments to mental health equity in America. She'll highlight the systemic, social, and cultural barriers that prevent fair access to mental health care and why addressing them is critical to creating a more just mental health care system. Meher, take it away.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm Meher, and I'll be talking about the economic impediments to mental health equity.
So, in the United States, the Declaration of Independence guarantees us life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But without good health, freedom and happiness cannot truly exist. That said, half of the adults in the US with a mental illness do not receive the care they need. This inability to access care strips them of their fundamental rights, like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And three main impediments that cause this inability to access care are underfunding, insurance barriers, and pharmaceutical research and development failures. Here's a little brief historical context. In the 1960s, the deinstitutionalization movement took place. So it was intended to move mental health care into more community-based facilities. The problem was that these facilities were never actually built, which led to many people suffering from mental illness being homeless or incarcerated. In 2008, the mental health parity law was passed, but there's still high denial rates, especially in intensive care, where denial rates exceed 90%. And in the 1980s, clozapine was created, and since then, there hasn't really been any new medicines created. So it shows that pharma's kind of been behind in the creation and research of new drugs for mental health care. So let's dive into underfunding. So public underfunding leads to overwhelmed and understaffed mental health services, which often results in limited access and long waits. So community mental health centers are very understaffed and they often close down. Additionally, the counselor ratios are far above recommended. So an example is that in rural Colorado, the ratio is 470 to 1, where the recommended ratio is 250 to 1. So as you can see, it's inevitable that counselors are going to be burning out or leaving the field altogether because this is like too much of a workload for them. And that leads me into clinician burnout. So 25% of US clinicians consider leaving their field. And due to that, especially rural areas are especially impacted. So 160 million Americans live in mental health care deserts, which are areas where mental health care isn't accessible. So the impact of underfunding is around 100 inpatient programs have closed in the last decade, and psychiatrists are paid like half the salary of cardiologists. Just to like give an example, so that makes the profession less attractive. And since there aren't as many providers and there's many people who need care, this leads to long wait lists and crisis often escalates. Now, insurance. So, as mentioned in the historical context, the Parity Act exists, but insurers still impose barriers, and denial rates often increase 90% for intensive treatments. So, an example of some limits that insurance, some insurance limits are a client in Orlando's insurance only covered five sessions of psychotherapy, and its research has shown that about 15 to 30 sessions are needed to properly recover. But obviously, this can exceed depending on the severity of the case. So many families, especially low-income families, face like impossible out-of-pocket costs. So considering that the average low-income family annual salary is 30,000 per year, if they have to pay for 25 sessions out of pocket, then that's 17% of their income, which, as you can see, is pretty impossible. So this is just a figure that shows the relationship between the socioeconomic status and mental health risk level. So as you can see, low income, unemployment, low education, housing instability, and food insecurity are all key factors that can cause that increase the mental health risk level. So if insurance isn't prioritizing these vulnerable populations, then crisis is bound to escalate. So the impact of these insurance problems are that reimbursement rates are 22% lower for behavioral health than physical health. So that leads to fewer in-network providers. So only 55% of psychiatrists accept insurance versus 89% of other doctors. And 65% of rural counties have no psychiatrists. So again, those mental health care deserts. And finally, 45% of psychiatric ER visits are the first contact with the system. So crisis care has kind of become a default. People wait until their condition gets so bad that they just need emergency care. They don't seek care earlier. So now we're going to talk about pharma. So mental health research and development funding is often much less than other diseases. For example, depression receives $1.8 per $1,000 burden. Schizophrenia receives $3.1. Bipolar disease receives $0.4 versus cancer, which receives $75.5. So as you can see, there's a big disparity between what pharma invests in. So this leads to many patients that are left with outdated medicines such as clozapine, and they often have severe side effects. Additionally, only 12% of mental health patients groups believe that pharmaceutical companies are effective at engaging their patients in the research and development process. So this shows that pharmaceutical companies aren't prioritizing the patient outcomes, they're prioritizing what's going to get them profit. So that leads me into the sponsorship effect, which impacts the clinical trials. So manufacturer-funded trials are shown to be 50% more effective than independent ones, showing that there is often bias in clinical trials. So this is just a chart that shows the amount of drug approvals by disease area. So as you can see, cancer, there's many, neurology, CVD, diabetes. Then we go into major depressive disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. So as you can see, there's a big difference between cancer and schizophrenia, for example. So the impact of this is that outdated medicines are often less effective, and there's also a economic impact. So mental illness cost Indiana $4.2 billion in direct, indirect, and societal costs, which is roughly 1% of the state's GDP. So not only does this impact individuals and communities, but it also impacts state economies as a whole. And this kind of creates a system where market potential matters more than patient experience. And the overestimation of drug efficacy in biased clinical trials can lead to inappropriate prescriptions, patient exposure to unnecessary side effects, and a misallocation of healthcare resources. So now let's move into some solutions. So a solution for underfunding, building a community-based stepped care model could enhance the workforce incentives and help address the issue of underfunding. So an example of this is the United Kingdom's improving access to psychological therapies success. It's actually shown a 40 to 50% recovery rate among treated patients. So what it is, it's basically it basically trains a large cohort of like low intensity cognitive behavioral therapy practitioners, and it makes its outcomes public. So the US could implement this by training lay counselors, expanding community centers, and monitoring outcomes. Another solution for underfunding would be to provide workforce incentives, such as loan forgiveness, rural rotations, and relocation support. An example of this is Australia's Rural Health Workforce Strategy, which aims to increase the amount of providers in rural areas. And placements actually increased from 3,000 in 2004 to more than 13,000 in 2018. So this shows that incentives for people to work for psychiatrists and mental health workers to work in rural areas, that it works. Like over time, we'll see an effect. So some solutions for insurance would be to have stronger parity enforcement through audits, penalties, and public dashboards. So an example, in Massachusetts, all 21 major carriers submitted certifications for parity compliance and none required corrective actions. So this shows that with proper oversight and enforcement, the existing laws that already are in place can actually work with their true intention can come true, you know? So another solution would be to expand reimbursement for integrated behavioral health and primary care. So the 2006 Health Insurance Act in the Netherlands mandates that 100% of the population is covered. This especially helps low-income communities because now we're talking about everyone needs to be insured and everyone needs to be covered. And then additionally, we could subsidize telepsychiatry. So in the Netherlands, they integrate their emergency care system with telepsychiatry. So this reduces wait times, and it's also reported high patient satisfaction has been reported. 78% of patients were actually satisfied with the reduced wait times, and 67% of patients were satisfied with the care that they received. So some solutions for pharma. So we would have to improve our public funding model. We would have to implement transparency reforms and prioritize patient-led initiatives. So for public funding, the UK's MQ Mental Health Research Program it's basically a program that provides targeted grants to accelerate psychiatric research. So it's shown that the data from this program has shown that every $1 invested in scaling up the treatment for depression and anxiety yields a $4 return in workplace productivity. So not only does it help the people, but it also helps the country as a whole. So transparency. The EMA's revised clinical trials information system and the European Union's clinical trials regulation mandates pre-registration and reporting. And the number of clinical trial submissions increased by 51% in 1 month after it was implemented. And then patient-led priorities would include advisory panels and quality of life outcomes. So an example of this is the UK's National Institute for Health Research Involve program, which mandates that funded studies include patient and public advisory panels. And it's shown that, and these kind of programs have actually been shown to increase trial enrollment by about 14%. So to conclude, mental health inequities are systemic, they're not random. Underfunding, insurance barriers, and pharma stagnation have worsened disparities. And solutions exist, some in the US and most of them in Europe, but they require investment, accountability, and patient-centered approaches. And mental health equity is not just a policy choice, but it's a matter of rights and justice. And that's the link to my research paper.
Maher, fantastic job. Appreciate the hard work and dedication that you put into your research, but even more so, the thoughtfulness and the focus in which you developed a set of solutions to create a framework for this very important problem. So, through your work this summer, by definition, you are now a mental health equity change agent. How's that feel?
Feels great. Yeah.
When you came into the process, what were you hoping to get? What were the skill sets that you were eyeing on developing, and what was the actual result compared to what you initially thought you were getting yourself into?
Initially I was like, I haven't really been exposed to writing a research paper, so I was really excited about the opportunity to learn how to write one and be able to write one. And then throughout the process, I learned that, I'm not actually just doing this work for myself. Like, this work can actually make a bigger impact on the community and the society. So that feels really cool to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts, not only in doing this type of work myself, but doing it with high potential teens like yourself, watching that realization that this isn't just an academic pursuit, it is
Yeah.
an opportunity to impact society. So let's talk about that impact a little bit. Um, how do the inequities in mental health care threaten the U.S.'s promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for its citizens and its residents?
Well, as mentioned in the presentation, like many people who aren't able to access care often end up homeless or incarcerated. And when you're homeless or incarcerated, you can't really like live up to your full potential. You can't really pursue happiness with that kind of a lifestyle. So,
Um, in order to overcome that barrier, you mentioned three main impediments, underfunding insurance and pharmaceutical neglect. So in an attempt to overcome those barriers, which do you think is the most urgent to fix and why?
I think that underfunding is the first thing that should be prioritized. Because if people don't even have a facility to go to get care, then insurance and pharma R&D don't even really like come into play there. First, people just need somewhere to go to get care.
Yeah, it's a triage approach, right? What the most important or the most critical
Yeah.
issue needs our attention first. Well, if that's the case, what are some of the real world consequences of underfunding mental health care facilities for patients and providers?
Um, so since many people don't have a place to go, they often end up in the ER and then they end up having a crisis and then they end up incarcerated and then homeless. And then it's kind of just like they're trapped in a cycle where they don't really have anywhere to go for care. So they're just, yeah, they just don't have anywhere to go, basically.
Yeah, it's a troubling cycle.
Yeah.
You spent a good portion of your time focusing on insurance. Um, how do the insurance loopholes that are present undermine the intent of things like the parity laws that were put into place to try to prevent some of the issues that you mentioned before?
So since these the existing laws aren't properly enforced, um many like low income families especially, even if they have insurance, they still face, like high out of pocket costs. So they often just don't go for treatment at all.
Speaking of treatment or lack thereof, you mentioned this idea of mental health care deserts. How does the lack of psychiatrists in rural areas highlight the intersection of geography and financial inequity?
So since they're like since rural areas are especially um impacted by by the economic impediments. Um Wait, can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, so the mental health care deserts
Mhm.
are a big issue.
Yes.
How does the lack of psychiatrists in those rural areas, the healthcare desert itself, highlight the intersection of geography and financial inequity?
So in these in these rural areas, if there's no psychiatrist, that means there's likely no mental health care facilities, which is why it's known as a mental health care desert. And so then if there's no facility or anything, insurance doesn't even matter because people don't have anywhere to go to get treated. Um, and geographically, like if no one's gonna drive like way too far to get treatment. So that's why like a solution like telepsychiatry for emergency room visits could help.
Um, you talked about some other solutions as well in the development um, of creating a platform for mental health equity. Um, Talk a little bit about the stepped care model that they're using over in England.
Um, so basically training like people who are training like practitioners um to so yeah, basically the stepped care model is basically supposed to train a bunch of like low intensity practitioners and it's also accompanied by like strong monitoring outcomes. So if we could implement something like this in the US, um we could have, more better trained, like it doesn't have to be like psychiatrists, but like even like the counselors and stuff can be better trained, and this could significantly help many patients.
Speaking of helping patients, you mentioned that pharmaceutical development is key in helping individuals address their mental health care issues, but we have fallen um, significantly behind in our research and development of those drugs that would help patients address the mental health care issues that they are suffering from. Um, how could patient-led research priorities make psychiatric treatments more effective and ethical?
It could definitely be more effective because you're actually going to the patients and asking them what they need instead of just creating a drug that would sell. Um, and also, it would make it more ethical because instead of just prescribing everyone the same thing and, for some people it doesn't work, for some people it has really severe side effects. Instead of that, you would actually be giving people more individualized treatment.
Yeah, that certainly would appear to be getting to the root of the individual's problems while addressing the collective.
Yeah.
Um, did your research change how you view either your future career path or your future in helping solve this particular problem when it comes to mental health care equity?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in science and healthcare. Um, so through this, I've actually learned that I have an interest in like policy making and stuff like that. So I might end up pursuing, so right now I'm kind of looking into like biomedical engineering, but later I might end up pursuing, kind of like an intersection of policy making and biomedical engineering. There's so many like career paths, exciting career paths that I like didn't even really think of, but now I'm actually like thinking of them. So
Yeah, and that's very interesting and tremendous insight because one of the things that we hear from our thought leaders and experts who come in and chat with us, especially those who are involved in the policy conversation and creating and advocating for policy, is that there is a dearth of science. There is a dearth
mhm.
of professional acumen in the policy discussion. They really are starved for practitioners who have an expertise in a particular area. Um, those folks aren't participating in the policy discussions to the degree that I think the policymakers need them to. So that
Mhm.
intersection of biomedical engineering and healthcare policy, I think is certainly a great destination for you. With all that said, so the final question, and I think it's the tough one, the toughest one we can ask is, do you think there's hope that we can successfully provide mental health equity in America in your lifetime?
I definitely think there is hope. I mean, nothing's perfect. Like even the solutions in Europe, there's still things that need to be worked on. But I do think we can take significant steps to improving it if we prioritize it. So
Well,
wouldn't be like a full fix, but at least we can get like a little bit far and take some steps towards mental health equity.
Well, Maher, that is fantastic. And with you and your cohort of teen change agents leading the conversation, I have no doubt that that is certainly not only a possibility, but a probability. And we wish you the best of luck. Thank you very much for all your work, your hard work and research over the summer. It was a pleasure working with you. We look forward to working with you again and wish you the best of luck. Keep being awesome. Enjoy.
Thank you.